Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, Managing Director and founder of The Sales Doctor. I'm joined today by John Broons, and John Broons is a globally awarded family business expert, one of only 3 people in Australia to hold the coveted title of Fellow of Family Firm Institute. John has dedicated his working career to answering the question, how do I guide and support families in business to a place where they're thriving? Not only has John spent the last 40 plus years answering this question, but he's also been there and done it. Early in his career, John successfully bought and sold his own family business while maintaining close and connected relationships with his own family. Not everyone can say that. And his expertise, his knowledge and experience working with family businesses and business advisors, both across Australia and internationally, has resulted in family businesses not only surviving, but thriving. Welcome, John.
Hello, Ingrid.
Great to have you here. I'm so thrilled because I believe that today's slant on family business, but also the lessons that we can take from family business back to non-family business, I think are immense. So we'll kick off. As we've just sort of said in the intro, you are the family business expert. For the listeners, though, who don't know your story, and I know we alluded to it in the intro there, can you please tell us your own family business lesson, really, that started you in this area of specialisation?
I grew up in a family business. My granddad, picture behind me, started a family business, started his business with his 2 sons and grew it. It became a public company. It was listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and it was a very big company that had many different things it did. It was cardboard box making, it was timber, it was importing, it was a Ford dealership. So it had many different facets to it. And my grandfather passed away in 1966, and my uncle and my father became joint managing directors. And they kept the business going for a number of years until they got the offer too good to refuse.
Wow.
At which point they went in their own different directions. So there was a splitting of the family tree, if you want to call it that way. My father kept some of those business assets and my uncle went off and did other things. So those business assets that my dad continued, when I left school, I joined in the family business. So that continued as well until my dad passed. Now, I'm the youngest of 4. My 3 older siblings are all girls. The oldest of my 3 sisters is 13 years my senior. And she had been spending many years, probably 4 or 5 years, working alongside my father, looking after not just a bit of the business stuff, because she ran our IT division, but she also looked after his personal interests, and he had a number of hobbies. So when my father passed away, my mother then became the owner of everything, and she designated my sister to be the managing director. And I'm going, what about me? I'm the prodigal son, the only son. It all should be me. So a very early lesson was cultural expectations don't necessarily stand true. And it took me a little while to understand that. But then I ended up being, I suppose the simple term is I was working for my sister, even though it was a family business. And there were other family members that also contributed and were involved in the business. And that was fine for a few years until there was a recession in the late 80s, and it affected our family business quite dramatically. So we had negative cash flow, 5 families living off one business, and that became very challenging. And we're a close family, so eating meals together once a week, the meal would go fine, but then the conversations about family business would arise and arguments would surface at the table and became very uncomfortable. This happened for quite a long time. It was really challenging, to say the least, and I didn't like staying on after the meal. I'd try and run away. But reality is that things got to a point at work where I made a personal decision to say, I can't do this anymore. It's destroying the family. And back in those days, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no such thing as a field of family business. So there were no advisors, there were no people to talk to. There were accountants and lawyers that would come up with ideas, oh, we can do this and we can do that. But accountants and lawyers work for the person that pays them. So they're working for a principal. And it came back to me really simply to say, I don't want to be in this environment anymore. How can I change the paradigm? So I put a proposal to my mother. I said, would you be open to me putting a proposal to you and the family? And she said yes, which caught me off guard because I was ready to leave.
Wow.
And in her wisdom, she said yes. So I then, over six months or more, actually put a proposal together which had 3 options. And I had to be very politically correct in my mind. So I'm working through this from what I believed was my common sense. Mum got the documents first, then the oldest sister, then the middle sister, then the youngest sister. Communication lines talked to me on the phone. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have Zoom. So it was a conversation that had to be face-to-face. Telephone conversations were a bit challenging. You couldn't do it as a group. So that led me to a meeting of the family in an office, in a boardroom. And I spoke to my proposal and walked out of that meeting owning a business and letting go of other stuff. That was family wealth.
Yes.
That actually gave me control of my own life for the first time. Not that I didn't have control of my life, but I was totally alone from a point of view of I could make the business, I could change the business, I could do what I wanted with the business, and I could go to work and not have somebody tell me what to do. And it wasn't necessarily the telling that was the part. It was a freedom of choice that came to me.
Yes.
So that's what started me on the journey, and through that I connected with something called FFI, and I was involved in the creation of something called Family Business Australia, and I've served on the board of that. So I've done a number of different things over the years. I've studied about it. I'm still connected with the Family Firm Institute in a study group, and I'm connected internationally through that group. It's really amazing. So when research is done, I'm reading that research and seeing how it plays out, not just overseas, but also in Australia.
Yeah, that's incredible. I have to go back though, and I have to ask you, with those 3 options that you wanted to present to your family for consideration, I mean, knowing your family as you did, and the fact that, it was a dynamic at that time that really didn't sit that well with you, and you weren't actually expecting your mum to say, yeah, I'm open to that. How did you, what were some of the things that you did that enabled you to first of all have that considered by your other family members, and then to get the solution that was most favourable to you as well?
Communication is key. Having open relationships and honest relationships is the only way you can actually do something similar to what I did. I mentioned earlier politically, mum first, then the older sister, then the second sister. That part is, to me, that was integral. Having the conversations, when I did the distribution of the proposal, mum got it first, then the older sister, then the middle sister. Every one of them had opportunity to call me. They had time. So I delivered the document on a Friday. We had the meeting scheduled together on the Monday. I said, you call me anytime you want me to come over and see you face to face. Fine, I'll be there. We'll talk it through.
Yeah.
And then we had a separate meeting in a geographically simple location that did not have a connection to the family. So I was taking it away from not mum's place, not one of my sister's places. We had our own private place that didn't connect with family. So if we walked away and everybody got upset, at least we wouldn't go back to that place again for a family dinner and feel challenged by it. So I had some underlying ideas in my head to try and keep it as low key as possible, even though everybody knew the conversation was happening.
I think that, so there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. There's the intention to be authentic in your level of engagement with your family members, if I'm understanding this correctly, John, that the ultimate intention here is to keep the family together. So it was the preservation of the family first, and then, find a way forward with the family business. Because I think had it not been that, if it had have been self-directed or self-serving in any way, it just wouldn't have had the same outcome.
Family is my top value.
Yeah.
It's, to me, my family are the people I will turn to when something goes wrong. And if that's my knowing that if I turn to a friend, they're possibly likely to help me, but they also may not, because it may not work for them. Family will tend to stick together. The right values, the right culture within your family will hold that and keep that together. And if you have that, then you're miles in front of most people who, well, that's not true. Not most people. I overgeneralize. People tend to stick close to family. That bloodline is really important. And it's only when you break that bloodline connection that, things, unless you're honest and you build a strong relationship and you connect with it, you're going to have some difficulties down the track. So family, to me, is number one. I'm still in very close conversation to my siblings and their partners, and to me, that's critical. It's part of my life. It will always be a very important part of my life.
And it's an important cornerstone to everything that you do here too. So let's dive into, some of the things that, kind of really contribute to how you work with family businesses. I mean, when we were, a few months ago when we were in Perth and we were having lunch together, and we were kind of flagging that I'd love to have you on my podcast. And we were talking about the difference between family business and, non-family business. And you said to me, look, family businesses are no different to any other business, but we both know that they are, because they have an added layer of familial relationships. I mean, you just got to ask anybody around Christmas, Christmas dinner every year, and depending on the family, how tricky just that one day can be, let alone working day to day in a business and then trying to pass that on to generations. So I wanted to understand your approach, and I think that you've beautifully given us a bit of a peek behind the curtain already about the way that you are oriented towards families and family businesses. But how do you keep a family connected and their business thriving?
There's a lot of it comes down to families don't know what they don't know.
Okay.
And our education system doesn't educate families about being in a family business. You can go to university and learn about business. You can experience business. Business is a system in itself where you have a leader, you have employees, and they make a product or sell a service and they can make a profit. That's one system. Family is a very different system. Family has a mother and a father. It has children. It has in-laws to those children. As a mother and a father, you will have parents, and they will have their connections and their however many siblings they have, and the aunties and uncles, and and it goes back, and you can track families' histories, and you can. So part of this, they don't know what they don't know is they don't necessarily look back at their history to see if there's some things that will be noticeable to somebody else that can carry through intergenerationally. So there's always a look in the past. In a business sense, it's really simple to set up a structure and you have a role. So the leader needs to know what his role is. And if that leader leaves the business, you find somebody else to fit that position. In a family, if somebody's a mother or a father and they leave that position, there is no one to fill that position again. That person is gone. So how do we handle that? Especially if we put the two systems overlaid, that you can't put them completely over the top. They will be side by side and they will have some overlap. Now that makes it already difficult because you're going to need some rules to go from the family side to the business side. How do we do it in such a way that we don't complicate things, that we don't make it too challenging for us? If a parent was to say, well, come and join the business, we'll make a place for you, that's great. And if that child comes into the business, really great, the child's working really well. If the child does not succeed in their position or is recalcitrant, does not fit, how do you ask them to leave? Unless you've got some rules.
Right.
And then you can destabilise the business system by paying them too much, paying them not enough, how the conversations happen at work. The labels will change from mum or dad to boss or leader or manager. So we have to be very careful about these positional changes. And that doesn't cover the other thing that causes most of the complications in family business, which is about the ownership stuff. And I say stuff because the ownership stuff is where the younger generation starts to think about, well, when will it be mine? What is mine? How is it going to be mine? When are they going to let go? When are they going to leave and let me do my own thing?
Yeah. Yes.
And in the ownership stuff is a separate system in itself, because that's about where the family is making its investments. The business is an investment, so it needs to be measured as an investment in one way, shape or form. And then how do we structure that process of measuring the investment? So overlaying all of these three separate systems, we have a governance. How do we communicate? How do we share the information? How do we, where does the money go from the business to get to the family? And does the money just go to the family or does it go outside? Who makes those decisions? There's so many questions that we don't get taught. So where do you go to find these questions out? And there aren't too many people that have actually done this work to understand the three separate systems.
Yeah.
Because if I make that overlay as a system itself and call it governance, where there might be overlays of 3 circles, you end up with 7 possibilities. But if I throw governance in, it goes from 7 to 15.
Right.
And how do we navigate all of these different headspaces that we have to carry? Because I don't know anyone that can carry 15 caps and change them at a moment's notice in a conversation when I'm taking a phone call after a phone call after a phone call, with challenges or decisions or opportunities. There's a lot going on.
So that's where you come in, right? And your guidance with your family business clients would be so important to facilitate the process for them of putting together and formulating their own set of rules. Because if they're involved in the setting of those rules and in the governance piece that you talked about, I remember when we were having that lunch, you talked about one of your clients taking, I think it was over 6 months or something, to build their a constitution, I think you
A
called it
family
a
charter, we call it in Australia.
family
Yeah,
charter.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Can you talk us through what that is and what that process really looks like, and what a family business will have at the end of that family charter to help them navigate the waters of the future?
Sure, thank you. Um, a few things I might say just before we go to the family charter.
Yeah.
When I work with a family business, I'm actually working for the family.
Yes.
Okay. So if you have the family will have other advisors. They will probably have a lawyer or an accountant giving them advice as to structure and whatever. And from where I sit, what I've seen is the directions that are given to those professions and those professionals may carry some bias because
Right.
those professionals have worked with a family for many, many years, and they will see a family member or a family line that may or may not fit or be challenged in some way. And I'm not saying this is always true, but there has to be someone that stands up for the whole family, that will
Yes.
say, in one way, shape, or form, it's not necessarily the best financial tax outcome or the best legal structure that will be the best for that family.
Yeah.
The family needs to be looked at as a whole. So when I work with a family, I'm working for everybody.
That's really powerful, John, because you're right. I mean, I think you alluded to it really early on in our conversation about, a lawyer, for example, or an accountant, whatever, will be working for one of those key parties, whereas you're looking at that after that whole family unit. That's, yeah, that's a really important distinction.
So with the family charter, a family charter is simply a set of rules for the family. It's not a legal document in Australia. We don't consider it a legal document, but it's a piece of paper that says this is how we believe we should be treating ourselves. These are things that we believe will work and that we will, take on. We talk about our values, and our values help us live the way we want to live, which is our family culture. And then it helps in our decision making about, do we want to do this project or do we not want to do the project? Do we want to bring our children into the business? And if so, what are those rules? We can set up other ideas as of how do we want to be seen, and we can set up a foundation or give to charity. How do we want to do that? And then how do we get the kids involved? Maybe we get them to do some research. How are we going to have meetings? When are we going to have meetings? How often are we going to have meetings? Are we going to minute these meetings? How do we connect the older generation to the grandchildren and have a family get together once a year? How are we going to fund that get together? These are things that, as a smaller family business grows into a larger family business, how do we communicate to everybody so that we're all on the same page? This is what the governance stuff is all about. The family charter can put rules in place, and we can talk about, if we want to help the kids and put some money aside for their education, if they want to go and study at a university overseas, or if they want to further their education in other directions, or they want to do even start small businesses of their own. How do we fund that? How do we allow them, give them that freedom so that they can still be aligned with the family and the desires of the family? And they can have possible opportunities of starting new businesses that will become part of the family structure.
Yeah.
There's so much that we can talk about, but once we've talked about it, we put it on a paper and we all sign up to it.
Right.
And because it's not a legal document, right, it's by choice.
Yes.
And it has to be by choice. You've got to want to sign into this. And if you don't, that's okay. That's okay. That might be when there's 16 children or in-laws in the family and somebody says, I don't want to be involved in this anymore. How do I exit?
Right.
And we can have an exit strategy in there.
Okay.
If you want to leave and you still want to, if you don't want to work in the business, but you want to still be a shareholder of the business, how do we talk about that? Or Even if you want to leave the business completely, how do we do that? Or if I've got conflict with a sibling, how do we resolve those conflicts? We can have a conflict clause in there.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. So, how long does that process take? I'm sure it's as long as a piece of string, and it depends on the family. That said, what are the ranges, and then how do you use that as as that cornerstone to helping the business to then navigate their way through in future, and how do you use that charter as a as an anchor to kind of bring them back to what they'd agreed on?
It generally takes 6 to 12 months to do it properly.
Yeah.
You have to have meeting after meeting. There have to be individual one-on-one meetings, and
Yes.
those individuals have to have the freedom to be totally open, knowing that what's said in that room with that individual and me is confidential. So when we come together in a group and I've got in my head what I understand that individual's desires, how can I move that conversation so that everybody can understand it, but not necessarily divulge any individual challenges that somebody might have?
Wow, that's tricky.
Yes, it's tricky. Well, this is the part about not destroying a family. I want the family to
Yes,
thrive.
of course.
And it takes time. They're learning what they want. In a lot of cases, individuals in a family business don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
They can be there by default. So you've got to find out what you want as an individual, as well as a married couple, as well as what you want for your family going forward. And sometimes the older generation doesn't see the younger generation the way they would like. How do we trust them? How do we let them? So the education is even giving them opportunities to grow so that the older generation can see the younger generation and feel comfortable, trusting. And then we also have to understand that sometimes from a small business growing into a larger business, there are sometimes structures in place that maybe the family home has borrowings against it, and the parents can't transition the shareholdings because of the borrowings. So we have to, this is a very simple exercise, but how do we undo the borrowing structures so that the next gen can move forward? Lots of conversations, and they are very in-depth, one-to-one, and then group, and it takes time to find out all of the different things that are happening, not just in the business, but in the family and in the structure of ownership.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic and very powerful. I wonder how many non-family businesses could use a similar type of process actually to come to a set of a cultural framework that sort of sets in motion a level of ownership and accountability about how we're going to do things. I appreciate that the level of depth, in a family business is very different, and in a non-family business you might get a lot of movement, in that leadership structure that once set it up, and then you might get complexity as new people come into that. Whereas with family, there's that continuity, more or less, continuity going forward.
It's a challenge. So the non-family business, the corporate entity, to try and make it as similar as possible to a family business, we have to understand the values that business operates within, that it believes its culture is all about.
Yes.
So if the values that are agreed upon by the leaders are understood, accepted, and believed by those others in the company, and those leaders are leading with common sense and alluding to the values, always returning to the values in their decision making, then there's an alignment that can be achieved. individuals coming into a business that is really clear in its values and the way it operates, those new employees will find the culture much more comfortable when they arrive. You feel at home, so to speak.
Yes.
Those employees that will turn up in a new company or for the first time into this new enterprise, if they don't feel comfortable within the first 6-8 weeks, then there's challenges within either the individual's values or the company's values that don't necessarily match. And that's then when things start to unfold as to, okay, it's going to be difficult, how are we going to do it? And we end up one side and another and we have conflict. So, or it may lead to conflict, doesn't always.
Yeah, it doesn't always. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
There's a Japanese company, you may use their product, Kikkoman soya sauce.
Yeah.
Now, the Japanese family name is Mogi, M-O-G-I. And they have a family creed that was created, I think, in the 16 or 1700s. And it stands today.
That's amazing.
And they talk about respect. And they talk about how we work together. And they talk about decision-making. And it's just a reference point. You can go on internet search Mogi family, Kikkoman family creed, and you will see for yourselves how simple and how easy it is to say, yeah, I like that. Yeah, I believe that. And I'm not saying it's the perfect template, but it's something that you can look at to say, okay, yeah, I understand these values and they would work for me, or some of them will work for me, or none of these work for me.
Well, they're definitely doing something right if it's lasted, 500 years or 300 years, however long.
However long,
300
yeah.
years. Yeah, that's just phenomenal. One of the other things that I think is transferable too is you talked about, older generations in the business looking at the younger generation and sometimes thinking, oh, not sure here. I mean, I think in the workplace at the moment, we've got 5 generations. We've got boomers, we've got Gen Xers, we've got Gen Y, we've got millennials, we've got Gen Z. From your perspective, what are the lessons in harnessing and transferring wisdom and experience from and to every one of those generations, and how do family businesses offer a reference point for other businesses in that regard?
Okay. Point number 1, go back to your values.
Right.
Okay. That's a cheeky point, but really communication is critical here. We're talking family conversations, and the part of being able to sit down with parents or children or aunties or uncles or cousins, husbands and wives, in-laws, you must be able to sit down and articulate sufficiently well your point of view. Now, I put it in the way of articulate, not just say what you want to say, but have a clarity around the point you want to make, be able to have sufficient vocabulary to explain yourself. And the others in the room must also have a sufficient understanding of what you're actually saying. So communication in this whole exercise of working with family is critical on communication. Now, intergeneration, you've got 5 generations, the Gen X's, Gen Z's, millennials. It still comes down to not just having the opportunity to sit down in a room and say, this is the way I think I'd like things to be, or this is what I would want, but also understand that sometimes a younger generation person doesn't necessarily want to talk on the telephone.
Right.
They just might want to have a face-to-face because that's comfortable, but answering a telephone, which might be useful and very comfortable for somebody in the 50s, 60s, 70s, telephone conversation was something really easy. Millennials are screen orientated. How do we want to talk to them? Do they, when they answer if they want to get a quote on insurance, they'll go for it and search for it on the internet. They might want the piece of the email to come back saying, here's your quote, rather than somebody cold calling and ringing them and saying, here's your quote. I don't want to talk to you. I did it online. I just want to communicate online. So we need to learn these differences about how communication works and be honest about how we want to talk to each other.
Yeah. I think that's, and not making assumptions, based on all of that too. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how we love to categorize people into groups, and then we can put all sorts of labels all over them, when actually it comes back to the person themselves, the individual, and what's been agreed to before. So beautifully said around your cheeky reference to values.
It's also very much the opportunity to have a get together at least once a year.
Right.
When families come together for whatever reason, a birthday, a celebration, a wedding, whatever, those opportunities of getting together are great to keep a family together and understanding each other, because they're there for joyous moments.
Oh.
Hopefully a joyous moment. There are times we get together, it's not so joyous. But really having a time we can sit together just to talk about family and business and how we interact as a family business is also something that families don't necessarily consider, but can go a very long way to keeping a family together and thriving, even while they're in business. They have to separate out that part to say, yes, we want to come together and have a talk.
Yeah, I really like that. And again, I think that there's application for other businesses to actually remember to enjoy one another's company as people.
Sometimes it can be important to have a facilitator in the room. If something isn't necessarily rolling smoothly, a facilitator who's not family but understands the family
and cares about them like you do.
You can be in a situation where tempers will rise and the emotions come up. And once we have emotions, we can build walls in front of us very quickly.
True.
So how do we actually stop those things from happening? And it can't be you or one of your siblings or one of your parents or one of your kids. It needs to be an external person that calls time. Let's have a break. What's going on? Where are we at? Why have the emotions just gone? And we can pull it back to the norm.
Yeah. So important. Oh, gosh, they're lucky to have you. John, what are some of the myths of family businesses that you think are important to debunk?
Oh, there's a very old one, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It's not statistically correct, number one. And number two, if I was to say, how does that work? The way it was measured and those people that came out with those conclusions didn't necessarily refer to companies that may have changed industry. So assuming a company that made horse buggy whips went out of business, or before it even went out of business, the family said, we need to get out of buggy whips. They could have sold the business and they could reinvest in another business. Now that would have been captured as, that's shirt sleeves, Gen 1. And they're no longer in business. So they didn't even get out of Gen 1. Or they could have been making buggy whips for 2 or 3 generations. And somebody said, we better get out of this. Or we close down.
Right.
Because the cycle of business will change. So buggy whips, nobody makes them anymore. Or if there might be 1 or 2 people that make buggy whips, right?
Pretty niche. Yeah.
But those people will have transitioned to other things. People will grow a business. The family doesn't necessarily have further interest, so they can sell their shareholding, take some money off the table, but go into another industry.
Yeah.
Or they might just have money and invest the money and become private equity holders.
Mm.
You know, that might be a dream. But the shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves, it's always apparent when that's the thing that's talked about. So people like to lean on that conversation. I've worked with companies that have transitioned businesses from one industry to another. I've worked with people that have sold out, and they do
Right.
totally different things.
Yep. Yep.
So it's not necessarily true.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So there's that one.
Yep.
What else? You know, sometimes, I mean, I remember when, you know, Kerry Packer, you know, when the Packers are one of the most well-known family businesses, but, you know, I remember when James, you know, took over and, you know, there was so much scrutiny on him as, you know, and there was that expectation almost that, you know, the third generation was going to stuff it up, you know, and get it wrong and, you know, waste all of the good fortune and the wise investment that, you know, generation two had created. Is that another myth? You know, a little bit like, you know, when bands create a second album, you know, it's kind of a similar type of expectation or negative expectation.
Expectations are really challenging. And if you're the founder of a business or a leader of a business, ideally you want to, if you have a family focus in your head, that you would like this to become an intergenerational business, because that's actually a decision that has to be made at some stage. Do we want to have family own and operate this business? So that needs to be a conversation and discussed. Now, if there is an intention by the incumbent, the owner, that they would like it to be kept together and run in that way, maybe the next generation, because they've been sufficiently educated, they've made different choices in their life and they don't want to go into that business or that industry. And they've learned other skills that they want to continue in their own way. They may want to stay external to that business. They may eventually become shareholders. They may not. But that then leaves the question as to, okay, well, where do I go for that next generation to lead the business? And there are examples of grandchildren. Harry Triguboff, investor in Sydney, very large property business developer, has just mentioned that his grandson will be his next leader of the family business. His children did not want to be involved in his business. Right. And yet his grandson, from what I've read, and I don't know the family at all, but from what I understand, the grandson was doing his own thing in property. And the grandfather saw that, and they've obviously had conversations, and only recently I saw it written in the paper that the grandson is the grandfather's next leader of the business.
It's funny, isn't it, how things can skip a generation, but certain things are in the DNA, it would seem, perhaps.
Well, again, I believe in that one instance. I think Harry Triguboff wanted to sell the business. So there was a time in there where the business could have been sold, and yet it's going to go to somebody else. So every family that I've come across is different.
Yes.
And every business, and I coach business owners and CEOs, so I know what I'm talking about. Every business is different. Even if you're in the same industry, the business is different. The people are different. Their experiences are different. The geography is different. The cultures are different.
Yes.
With so many differences, we need to communicate sufficiently well to all be on the same page from a decision-making process. So when we talk intergenerationally, how do we speak the same language? And in all of this, we need to trust those people. Trust is something that is unequivocal when it's in family business. If you can't trust your siblings, if you can't trust your parents, or you can't trust your children, something's wrong somewhere.
Also,
So go back to your values. What are your values? How did you teach your children? What did you teach your children? Children that played mum off against dad about the chocolate or the dessert or I want this toy or that toy. The parents obviously haven't talked sufficiently to say, if you say no, I'm going to also say no, but let me know.
yes, yeah,
Communication. So if you've got a
yes,
set of values and you're trying to teach your children, have a conversation with your kids. What do you think our family values should be? Have a short list and stick them up on the fridge. And if
yeah,
responsibility is one of those things on the list, your job was to fill the dishwasher after dinner. Why didn't you do it? That's one of our values, responsibility and respect.
yes,
And we teach. So a lot of what I do is education and re-education part of
yes,
the time.
yes. So important. Communication across all relationships. It always distills down into that communication, trust, those two things. John, the origin story is a cornerstone for family businesses. It's what is interesting. I've seen ads lately for the Bundaberg rum family business, for example, and the origin story of that, and they've kind of capitalised on that with their latest advertising campaign. How can non-family businesses harness this concept to better engage the hearts and minds of their customers and their employees?
Family stories that actually achieve intergenerational change are things that are actual timelines in history. And we can talk about history. Family members will write books about what it was like when I was a kid and how I got to this place. And that builds this emotional connection. And in families, there is a context that I can call comfortably emotional ownership. Children will take emotional ownership into the workplace when they're called in at 10 years old to come and help in the grocery store or help in the stationery. I used to go into my granddad's factory, and the first thing I did was go to the stationery cupboard and grab some pens and pencils because I just loved it. I don't know why, but I felt I owned the place. I didn't. Had nothing to do. I'm 10 years old. That history, if it doesn't exist, then what you need to build on is your values.
Right.
Because that will create the culture going forward. That's what you will build on going forward. How we do the right things, how we give to charity, how we treat our employees. It comes back to the values. The stories tell fantastic pictures. The Faber-Castell family business, now I think it's 8 or 9 generations. I don't exactly know where it sits, but some years ago I met one of the family members and I got a bit of the story. And a lot of the paradigms that existed then don't happen today, right? It had to be the son that owned the business intergenerationally. And there was a time where one of the sons had the business, the son died for whatever reason, and the daughter was the only family member.
Right.
Now, the business could go to the daughter, but it still needed to be run. Now, I'm talking about the 1700s, I think, or the 80s, a long time ago. And this was Faber, the name Faber.
Yes.
So this is how the business started with the name Faber. Now, this individual, this lovely lady, all of a sudden, by law, had to marry to keep the business. So they had to go to the king to get permission to keep the name so that she didn't lose her name, because the business had to stay in the name through the structuring of the will. The business had to keep the name. She got the business, had to keep the name, and she married a Count Castell.
Oh.
That's the Castell in Faber-Castell. And his coat of arms was apparently the jousting horses.
Right.
So when she married with permission from the king, it became Faber-Castell, and that's where the logo came from.
That's interesting.
So that's a story of the past, and that's third, fourth, fifth, sixth hand. So I may not have it totally correct, but that's that's a sample of how do you connect people to history and have an emotional connection to a product and a family who own a business. To me, that was a great connection.
Yeah, that is a great connection. I mean,
corporate world can't do that. Corporate world don't have necessarily those family stories. So they have to be able to say, how do we connect on an emotional level with our customer base?
Yep.
And that's a really difficult job.
Yeah.
A really difficult job, especially if you're a startup. You can talk about the history of the startup, how it's a couple of individuals that got together and created something new. That's a beautiful story. And that will play at the heartstrings. Corporates have a different perspective. Okay, we're 16 businesses. We have 100 million apiece. We're going to put it all together and start a business in mining or in oceanography or laying cables across the sea or saving the whales. Unless it's something that the general public can connect to and understand, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
We all want emotion in our lives. We all want that positive feel.
Which is, well, I mean, it's the fundamental core behind all decision making and connection. But I really get your point. I'm sort of thinking about some bigger organisations that once upon a time would have had a founder story, but I wonder how much that's been lost in their growth, their mergers, their takeovers, their this, their that, their different iterations, to the point where, eventually you've got nobody, in a business. I'm not talking about obviously family businesses now, but just like a bank, for example, or an insurance company or a whatever. But you've got all of these people who have no direct connection to the origin of the business, let alone an emotional connection. And a lot of those stories would have been lost unless they've been captured somewhere within the business.
Cadbury's started off as a small family business.
Right.
Cadbury's is the name, right? Illy Coffee, family business. I don't know if you're a coffee drinker, but
I can see the brand.
Yeah. Peugeot cars, I believe, are family business.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing because my understanding is they have 35% of the shareholding, but they have control of the board, which means they have control of the business. So it's quite an interesting dynamic when we start talking definition of family business.
Yeah, true. Yeah, very, very true. Well, John, I would love to invite you back down the track a little bit, if that would be all right with you, because I feel that there's just so much that I think we can really delve into. We've just begun our conversation today, and as always, it's been thoroughly enjoyable. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you, Ingrid. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, and to find out how the Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, please email me at ingrid@thesalesdoctor.com.au. Visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.